Hey, welcome back to the e-learning video series on BSF Biowaste Processing. This module in the BSFL Conversion chapter will focus on the pre-processing stage. After watching this module, you'll be able to describe the process parameters of this stage. You'll be able to apply reduction of the particle size and sorting of the processed biowaste for treatment. You will also be able to recognize the need for certain data and apply the procedures to be able to collect this data.
In this module, we'll be looking at the pre-processing stage, where we start when the tricycle arriving at the facility is unloaded and the waste is being sorted into three fractions: inorganic materials, organic materials that are not suitable for BSF, and organic materials that are suitable for BSF. The BSFL suitable waste is then shredded and stored in bins. This process is very important because the waste that arrives at the pilot site is mixed waste, although it comes from a vegetable and fruit market where you would expect the waste to only consist of rejected fruits and vegetables. So it's important that you remove any materials that cannot be fed on by the BSFL. Not so much because it can harm their health. The black soldier fly are very resilient, but more so to smoothen the operation further downstream, ensuring that the harvesting process runs smoothly because all of the substrate has been reduced in a size to a sand-like material by the BSFL through feeding on it, and so it can be easily separated. Here we come back to the overview of the BSFL conversion steps that we introduced to you in the last module. We're going to be looking at the pre-processing stage here, which includes the step of sorting the received waste into the three fractions that I introduced to you previously, and the further processing of the fraction that will be fed to the BSFL. We have the three main fractions where we separate our waste in, which are inorganic materials, non-BSF suitable organic materials, and the BSF suitable organic materials. The BSFL do not feed on the inorganics, so we separate them out and recycle them. For the materials that are not suitable for BSFL, the larvae will partly feed on them, but they don't feed on them well. And what then happens is that eventually the material still partly keeps its original form in the residue, which, as I mentioned to you before, could disrupt the harvesting process. So we separate out these organic materials and we compost them. Then the substrate that can be fed to the BSFL can be digested faster, and the residue can then be separated after it because of the reduced particle size when we shred the organic waste before. So the next step is then that we reduce this particle size of the BSFL suitable waste by shredding it. After this step, we then want to make sure that the water content of the substrate that is fed to the BSFL is between 70 and 80%, because this creates the optimal feeding conditions for the larvae, and it results in most cases in a dry residue, which again makes it easier downstream to separate the larvae from the residue. We do this by mixing various of these waste streams together or mixing waste streams with bulk materials before feeding it to the larvae. The following materials can be used for the operation of pre-processing. First of all, after sorting, the waste that is used for the BSFL conversion has to be shredded using a blade shredder to reduce the particle size of the BSFL suitable organic fraction. All waste materials, including the waste materials not selected for BSFL processing, can be stored in material storage bins. The different materials can be weighed on the bulk scale before, between, and after the processing steps. In terms of adjusting the water content of the material, a mixer can be used to mix different waste streams and a possible dry material together to come to a suitable water content of your substrate. A dry matter or TS oven is used to then analyze a sample of this material to know the actual water content that has been reached. In the following step-by-step process video that you will see after this, we want to focus on how the waste will look when it is pre-processed. And we had to shoot this part in a studio to give you a clear image on how it looks. And this is why we cannot show you the materials that you're currently seeing in front of you due to their size. The materials shown here are used at our pilot site, and you have probably seen them in the video before this. So after a quality check and acceptance, place the waste near the shredder. Here, a small container instead of a bucket is labeled, and the shredder is replaced with a meat grinder to show you how the substrate should look after shredding. Weigh and document each full bucket of the shredding waste using a bulk scale. If the waste substrate is still too moist, a water content above 80%, a dry bulk material has to be added to balance the water content and allow for the residue to be dry by the end of the process. 3 options are shown here. You could add palm kernel meal, possibly milk powder, and or cocoa peat. You can mix the materials in with the waste before feeding it into the conversion units by mixing it, or simply add the dry material to the crates first and then add the wet substrate on top so that the dry material absorbs some of the moisture. As with the previous chapter on BSF rearing, we're now coming back to an overview of the activities in the pre-processing stage according to the checklist that you see in front of you. This first step that we have gone through is the organic waste collection, which we showed you in the introduction module. In the pre-processing stage, we started by sorting the waste, putting the empty bucket on the concrete floor and removing the inorganic materials and place them in a separate basket or bin. And remove the carbon, cellulose or rich fiber organic materials directly from the tricycle that were not suitable for BSFL conversion, placing them on the compost heap. We then shredded all the BSFL suitable organics by placing a waste transfer bucket under the shredder, shredding all the separated material on the concrete floor and replacing the full transfer bucket, which was labeled, constantly by weighing it and adding it into the larger IBC tank where we store the waste. We have 2 data collection activities in this stage. The first is the waste sorting activity, where we measure and note down the weight of the waste received from the different waste sources. We also measure and note down the weight of the inorganic waste and the BSFL suitable waste. We have the waste shredding operation, where we measure and note down the weight of the waste after shredding it, which is the waste that will go to the BSFL conversion area. Here you find the performance control data sheet, where you can fill in the data on the different waste types that you receive and process in one day. So the first left 2 columns, you will have to fill in the waste source and the amount of kilograms that you have received from this source. The example shows that on this day, 350 kilograms of wholesale fruit waste and 560 kilograms of waste from the fruit and vegetable vendors was received. In the right 2 columns, you'll find the different waste types after processing and before mixing them together. That will be fed to the BSFL on that day. On this day, a mixture of 345 kilograms of wet fruits, 40 kilograms of milk powder, 150 kilograms of soybean cake, and 180 kilograms of non-leafy vegetables were processed for BSFL and eventually mixed and fed to the BSFL. Also on this day, 360 kilograms of material went to the composting site and 25 kilograms of inorganic material were separated out from the received waste before and while adding it into the shredder. So I hope you understood most of what I just mentioned. Let's refresh your mind with some questions. First of all, why does the waste need to be clean and reduced in particle size? It is to ensure that the larvae can feed on it more efficiently and that the dry residue has a small particle size so it can be separated well from the larvae when it's being harvested. Second question. What is the required water content range for BSFL conversion? It is around between 70 and 80%.
We've already come to the end of this module on pre-processing. In this module, we saw that the pre-processing step comes before the treatment and it therefore prepares the biowaste for feeding as a substrate to the BSFL. We saw that reducing the particle size and the conditioning of the biowaste streams allow for better conversion by the BSFL. Lastly, we saw that the data on incoming waste streams and pre-processed streams is collected to support the performance indicator points. Thank you for watching this module, part of the e-learning video series on BSF Biowaste Processing. More information can be found in the BSF step-by-step guide, which you can download through the QR code here.
Both of these materials were part of the Forward project by EWAC, in collaboration with the Ministry of Public Works in Indonesia and funded by SECO, the Swiss State Secretariat for Economic Affairs.